So Jeff is in the Rift Valley of Kenya this morning, and he has provided us with a nice weather outlook that he recorded and put on the web for us last night about 9 o'clock. So it's pretty fresh, but I'm sure he's not so fresh in Kenya right now because it's a long ways away. So listen up.
Morning. We're going to be, unfortunately for many of you, looking at a continuing or repetitive theme before all is said and done here. But starting off first of all with the past week, obviously a very dramatically different week that developed here prior or relative to the previous week, with much cooler and actually much significantly wetter than what we had the week before. Our mean temperatures for the week range generally from 6 to 10 degrees below normal. You can see on the left-hand side of the graphic here, that was true across almost all of the upper Midwest, with the upper air pattern that I'll talk about. And on precipitation totals on the right-hand side here, most of the states saw or observed a quarter to a half an inch, some cases greater than that. And in a couple of spots like West Central in northwestern lower Michigan, it was actually a little bit less than that. The other couple of other issues of note, or items of note, certainly, we did have additional freezing temperatures here. Some of them were quite cold, down into the low and mid 20s in some cases, which isn't completely unusual, but beginning to be somewhat anomalous for this time of the year. And we also saw in many areas, especially given the 70s and even 80s for temperatures the previous week, we did see some snowfall on occasion during over parts of the state as well. So it was a very dramatically different week. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we unfortunately probably are going to be seeing some similar weather conditions in the not too distant future. And why? Why do we see this major change? And you're going to see another map like this here in just a couple of minutes. But on the left-hand side, we see the upper air pattern across the lower 48 states. Here, this is yesterday, Wednesday at 8 o'clock. And on the right-hand side, basically putting these two pieces together, these are temperatures, surface temperatures, and they're expressed here in terms of an anomaly from normal, with the blues and purples being cooler than normal, and the oranges and browns, etc., being warmer than normal. And you can see a very clear pattern here with this big troughing feature across southern Canada, across the border here of Ontario and Quebec, bringing northerly and northwesterly flow into the Great Lakes. And that is the direct physical cause of this unusually cold string of days here we've had over the last several days. So remember this pattern, because unfortunately we're likely to see it again. But this is, if you think about a direct cause, this is it. And the troughing feature across this part of the continent was actually a little bit stronger and certainly more persistent, I think, than what the model guidance had suggested earlier. Which again, the result was a long string of unusually cold weather here for this time of the year. Our soil moisture, with very little evapotranspiration taking place here this last week, still running above normal across most of the state. On the right-hand side here, the panel, this is the percentile and this is for the whole profile. Looking here with the greens, you can see over much of the Great Lakes region still running above normal for our soil moisture content here for the last week in April. That's not a big surprise given where we've been. So let's look at the forecast, what's up ahead here. And starting with current surface conditions today, several weather features to talk about. The first one is going to be, you can see a frontal boundary, a little area of low pressure just north of the border. That's going to affect the Upper Peninsula here today, but not the rest of the state. So, and actually with a fairly significantly different forecast, we'll be looking at rain and snow still mixed. It's cold enough for snow there across the Upper Peninsula, but as we go south of the bridge generally, and certainly into the central and southern part of the state, we will be looking at a mostly fair, dry, and actually seasonably mild day. High temperatures across most of the state, ranging from the 50s in the far north to the low 60s in the south. And we could probably make the argument right now, looking at the forecast, that today may be the warmest day that we see over the upcoming week. I think that's probably a good bet. It'll be a little bit cooler tomorrow, but still, again, today is probably the in terms of being outside and doing anything outdoors, probably the best opportunity that we'll have for certainly for much of the majority of the upcoming week. By tomorrow morning, weather system, the second one of note here, moves out of the southern Great Plains and into the Ohio Valley. You can see the center of low pressure here tomorrow morning into southern Indiana and the Ohio Valley. And that's going to bring the threat of rain and the likelihood of rain beginning, it looks like probably the sunrise or so, the early morning across the far southern and southeastern parts of the state. That will spread northeastward during the day. And this one is also like the weather system here today in the UP. It will only affect, it looks like, mostly the southeastern half of lower Michigan, where we could see a quarter to as much as half an inch of rain here as that system moves north and eastward. That precip will come to an end with that weather system probably by evening and set the stage for about 12 hours of dry conditions. And you're going to hear a theme here. And before the next weather system moves in, and that comes in for the weekend and Saturday right now, looks like we will see showers likely statewide during most of the day, and then moving ahead here, I mentioned there were going to be some. Here's the forecast map for Friday. Tomorrow evening, you can see again a lot of green on the map with continuing chances for precipitation. Here's the map I did want to show you that compare back with what we had for Wednesday. This is and this is not the same map. This is a forecast for conditions on Monday morning, this beginning of next week. And on the left-hand side here, this is the upper air flow predicted at that point in time, and you can see a very similar feature. Big cutoff low right over, actually centered right over Michigan. And what this means, and with that on the right-hand panel here, temperatures remaining much below normal for this time of the year. You can just see the direct correlation between where that low is and the cold weather, and then actually warm weather outside of that. Well, what this means in a nutshell is just an extended period of cloudy, very unsettled weather, daily chances for showers. Because of the cold, this trough also has its own cold air with it. There will be mixed precipitation, and it's certainly snowfall in portions of the state. It looks like right now the core of this cold air will be here by Sunday and then continue Monday into Tuesday. There is maybe some moderation by the middle of next week, but I think really the big story here is we're on a downward slope or downward slide with temperature, and the other one is precipitation chances almost every day. And we will see probably, I think in northern parts of the state, a good chance for yet some accumulating snowfall, particularly on Sunday, Monday, and into Tuesday. So we're not done with the winter season yet. It's still here in a transition, and this is another piece of it. But overall, the big picture here, it's going to be a tough one, tough sledding for anything to get much done. Today is a nice day again in many parts of the state, especially in the south, but it's going to go downhill by tomorrow and continue that way. So wish we had better news, again, for those of you waiting to get back in and get things done. But this is not the best forecast we could have had. Now, precipitation totals here for the next week, you can see quite a variety, quite a range across the state, ranging from less than half an inch in western sections of lower Michigan to more than an inch in and I think this is particularly true northern parts of the state, especially in the UP. There will likely be could be even pushing an inch and a half or even more than that. A very wet week for that part of the state, including again some frozen precipitation. And then in going south, most of the precipitation or the heaviest precipitation will be in the eastern half of lower Michigan. So quite a unusual variety or a range of precip for this time of year. But I think just more importantly, almost a daily chance beginning tomorrow and then continuing on into the early part of next week. Virtually every day there will be a significant threat of more rain. Well, where are we headed beyond that? And at least in the next couple of weeks, the guidance is consistent, and it is suggesting, I hate to say more of the same or rinse and repeat, however you want to term it, but it does look like more of the same upper air pattern And on here, the 6 to 10 day outlook at 8 to 14 days, very similar to this, maybe a little bit less amplified, but our jet stream flow here on the left-hand side here, there's that big trough still there, at least over the first several days
Had a
of May.
glitch.
There's a ridge out over the Intermountain West and then another trough, but it does look like, at least for the next 1 to 2 weeks, that this pattern that we're in with these big upper air troughs over the region will continue. And that's a very, very strong likelihood, or will lead to the very strong likelihood of cooler than normal temperatures. And as you can see below that, for a precipitation forecast, normal to below normal, or maybe just even below normal. We will. That's one, I think, maybe positive bit of news here, is that we should see, after the next few days, we should see some reduction or decrease in the amount of precip that we're likely to see in the near future. So that's the medium range for the rest of April and certainly into early May, cooler, and then trending a little bit drier than normal. Now, we do have a new ensemble of long lead outlooks here going out into further, and there's a couple pieces of news here. One is an interesting one, our outlook on the top here, monthly temperature forecast for May, that's the upper left box here, and then precip for May on the upper right. The temperatures are still forecast in the, well, near to a little bit warmer than normal still for the month of May. But the big change from what we saw in previous outlooks is that they now call for increased odds of drier than normal conditions during May. That was not the case before. It's mostly a result of some of the forecast, model forecast guidance that we see, but clearly here for the month of May here, you do see the drier than normal, and that's a little bit of a new theme. Below that, we have our new outlooks for the 3-month May through July period, and those are very similar to what we were before. Normal to above normal, or even warmer than normal mean temperatures. On the precip, you can see they have basically the equal odds. But we also have seen a tendency, if you go beyond this into the summer months, the outlooks actually do still call for wetter than normal conditions, or favoring that. One other, and where do some of these things come from? One of the new, I think, pieces of news here in the long lead outlooks is that we've talked about the end of the recent La Nina event in the equatorial Pacific, and we're back to neutral there. That ended fairly quickly after 3 years, that's odd to have one last that long. But the big news now is that not only is the equatorial Pacific warming up and again, La Nina, typically we see cooler than normal conditions down in that part of the world, but likely maybe seeing the opposite phase of the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, as we frequently see it in the acronym, and probably to the development of, again, an El Nino event here by maybe the fall or the winter. And that is starting to have an influence on some of these long lead outlooks. But most of that will come later this year, but we'll talk more about that. El Nino conditions, one thing to remember in general with a couple big picture type things is we typically see better crop yields in many of the major production areas of the world during El Nino conditions versus La Nina. So that's something to at least look at here. And for us, typically the greatest statistical correlations or links are with maybe a milder and drier than normal winter. And then so that's one thing to keep in mind, but that's way out. So wrapping things up here quickly, again, a very, very cool, cloudy, unsettled type of forecast. I hope we don't have too many of these to talk about, but this one certainly is in that category. And looking at, in some parts of the state, significant rainfall and snowfall still, unfortunately. Also looking probably at the likelihood at more freezing temperatures in northern parts of the state by the late weekend and into early next week. But again, unsettled is probably the best word we can overall describe this. And then beyond that, more of the same into early May, but then possibly some changes after that. And right now, how far out? Well, maybe a couple of weeks out, we'll see a significant change in our jet stream flow across North America that will lead to something a little bit more towards normal. And that's the hope right now. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here for this week and wish everyone luck with these conditions, but not obviously less than ideal here for the next several days. Thanks.